Hello everyone, it is 4:30 p.m. It is Wednesday. This means it's time for the ViaMonstra Academy office hours. Today with a very special guest, which I will introduce in just a little bit here. As usual, this is where you can ask questions around anything related to MDT, Intune, ConfigMgr, systems management, and pretty much anything that is related to those areas. So with that being said, let the questions come in. All right, and welcome, Donna. How are you?
Doing well. Thank you for inviting me to the show. It's great to be here.
Of course, it's great having you. And for those of you that doesn't know Donna, she is quite famous in our community for some of the tools and solutions she's been working on for a good few years now.
hmm
And for those of you who haven't seen it, let me go and share that link with you right away. Just gonna open up a fresh browser. I have 4 billion tabs open on this one, so I'm just gonna do that one and then go ahead and share my screen.
Okay.
Da-da-da. This one here has been a classic in terms of maybe I should enable the screen also. What do you think?
Hey, I know that tool.
Yeah, I figured you would. So, Donna,
hmm
please, who are you?
So I am currently a senior product manager at Microsoft, working on Windows 365. So now I am 100% all in on cloud. Of course, prior to joining Microsoft at the beginning of this year, I was a consulting engineer with CDW. It's fancy for a consultant. Um, for a little over 10 years, working with ConfigMgr primarily. It's where I really found my love and passion for OSD. Also worked with remote desktop services, later Azure Virtual Desktop, and then Windows 365. Became a self-taught PowerShell author. So when I started writing WIM Witch, and I like to share this little tidbit that before, when I undertook writing WIM Witch, the biggest script I had written was maybe like 50, 60 lines. It's insignificant. There were no functions. It pretty much went from line 1 to line 60, and so when I started all those fundamentals, like how to write a function, didn't know. How to write a GUI, no idea. I just knew it was possible. So, and to have taken that to to WIM Witch, which is now used globally. I've got 2 to 3,000 active users. Which I like to take that number, then multiply it by 100, because I figure if you're doing OSD, you're probably not going to be doing servicing for anything under 100. So you take 2,000 times 100. What is that? My math sucks. With 200,000 computers that have probably been imaged with the assistance of my tool, which is pretty awesome. So I mean, if I can do it, I'm not especially bright or talented. I'm just persistent. So if anything, hopefully that helps to motivate some folks to get started writing their own tools, because that's one thing that we always could use more of, is community tools.
Yeah, I usually say that at least for myself, my stubbornness goes a long way. It's like it should be doable. So yeah, very grateful for the tool. It's very, very helpful, and it has a pretty interesting. I mean, just the sheer number of config manager customers these days, managing almost 100,000 organizations using the platform,
Mm-hmm.
managing 200 some million devices. So yeah, there could be more downloads, put it that way.
Mm-hmm.
So don't be surprised if it goes up over
No,
time.
I think I really should invest in is getting it written for the community hub. Because that way it's an easier click. It's just that there's a ton of engineering. Because one of the things when you start with, oh, this should be possible, and you have no architectural design in there, you tend to paint yourself into corners. And then I still haven't quite figured out how to, because I can integrate with ConfigMgr going from an existing WIM Witch install. That's easy, but it's going the other way. I still haven't quite figured out yet. But
I haven't debugged about that one, but yeah, that would be a nice addition to have it
mm-hmm,
available in the community hub.
I think so. And maybe some Windows 365 stuff. I mean, I'm sure there's not enough in there.
There you go. So it's been, what, about a year now since you switched over to Windows 365?
Yeah, I started the first week of January. So,
Okay, so almost, yeah.
and yeah, joining Microsoft definitely is a drinking from the fire hose type of activity, because there's just lots of people that you need those connections of, oh, this scenario, I should just go talk to so and so. And I really didn't have a ton of that. I did over on the ConfigMan side, but I wasn't working with ConfigMan, so only so much that I came in with with pre-existing knowledge. But it's been it's been great. I'm just so proud of the team that I'm working on, and the solution that we're building. Yeah, I work with some very smart people. Uh, my teammates have all been there for at least 10 years. I'm the noob by easily by a decade. So yeah, every day I'm learning something new. It's really interesting to see how the sausage gets made. Yeah.
Yeah, just the other week, no, 2 weeks ago, I got my very first Windows 365 business going, so I could get some serious bandwidth up to an Intune tenant that I was working with. That was quite the difference in upload speed
Oh yeah, yeah.
compared to
It's
my microwave link here at home that I have like 20 megabit upload on.
yeah,
So that was
it's
cool.
absolutely wild when you can operate a machine that's sitting right on the backbone.
Yeah, so that was I had stuff that took me hours and hours to upload, like upload in minutes, like done. Okay,
Hmm.
good. So, all right, let's see. We have some questions coming in. We shall start from the beginning. Imran is asking on YouTube. We have some devices that are not on Secure Boot. What's the best way to enable Secure Boot on Windows existing devices? Uh, Anyone want to take a stab on that one? Andrew, Donna?
Assuming that these are all physical. Oh boy, that's a challenge. Because now you got to talk to the BIOS, and then you need to make sure if any of these devices have been around that your techs weren't disabling UEFI so they could get Pixie to work. So really, you need to kind of assess the environment. You need to know which manufacturers you're working with, find what tools that they have, start with a pilot to be able to deploy out the configuration to kick that over. If there's passwords involved, it's a lot of logistics, even getting to that point to flip the switch. Uh, Once it's flipped, it's no big deal, but um, building collections if you're using configuration manager to filter and sort who's who and what the existing configurations are while you're there. Are you going to go ahead and update the firmware while you're in there? Should you also update your TPM firmware? Are you going to it's a lot of logistics, more so than writing the script or making the function work.
It's, also the sheer amount of testing that goes into this is, I mean, if you're lucky, the machines are already on UEFI and you just didn't enable Secure Boot for whatever reason. That means the partitions on the installations are already lined up. They should be. But if you are still on BIOS mode and you have to do the partitioning as well, that adds also some extra complexity to it. So I can go ahead and share some work related to this. If I go to one of my ConfigMgr instances, I have a few that I work with. Here is obviously a sequence that I've been using to do like basic configurations in this case. enabling secure boot for the different vendors using their different tools to do so. So you have to work with the Lenovo tools, the HP tools, the Dell tools, because there is like a unified configuration from all these different vendors. You can put these into PowerShell scripts if you want to add some additional error handling and logging, and that will take care of that configuration. If your disks are not lined up correctly, all hope is not lost. You can still do that conversion. The most reliable way I've found it to be done is to actually reboot machines into WinPE, do the conversion, and then do the configuration and boot back into Windows again. Because if you do the configuration first and the conversion fails, congratulations, you have a device that no longer boots.
There it is. Okay, I was going to say, are you using MBR to GPT? But yes, you absolutely are. Boy, that tool, I've used that command line. I don't know how many thousands of times during the doing OSD.
And then, of course, the whole TPM management is as a separate beast on its own. I was working with a customer recently for about 2 weeks, getting it to a reliable solution to upgrade all TPM 1.2 they had up to TPM 2, because there are so many states that device can be in, so many exceptions, and we're ending up writing like long scripts to do that. So it's doable. It's just, as you mentioned, Donna, it's a bit of work.
Now, of course, what you could do, I mean, once you figure out that amount of labor, I mean, you could kind of maybe go to a BYOD footprint and go Cloud PC, and then you don't have to worry about, because now Secure Boot is enabled by default for Cloud PCs.
There you go. Throw the devices in the bin and go cloud. All right, that was the solution. All right, let's see. Chad is asking. Okay, so basically the question is regarding ADMX templates, where the Windows 10 and Windows 11 has some conflict issues. How are you dealing with that issue in the real world? Andrew, any comments on that one?
No, I'm a little behind the ball here on this one because we're primarily still focused on Windows 10, so we don't have much of a mixed environment yet. We've just kept the Windows 10 ADMX templates in place. So unfortunately, I don't have much real-world experience to impart on this.
Okay, Donna, anything?
Well, it's been a little bit since I've gotten to play around with GPOs, so I'm a little rusty on that side. But I suppose what you could do is use filtering or WMI to populate either your OUs or your security groups based off of operating system, and then target the specific the policies to their respective operating system to make sure there isn't any conflicts.
That's absolutely doable. You can build separate WMI filters for Windows 10 and Windows 11 because they do have obviously different versioning. In terms of the management, what I found is that, and this goes a little bit against, there was a blog post put out by, I forgot who it was. Yes, Mr. Helmut, I will bring up that link. Coming here. So basically, where the recommendation was to manage them completely separately, and what I found is that for most customers that I've been working with that have started their Windows 11 journey, the Windows 11 templates have been my go-to starting point, and I use them to manage also Windows 10 devices because the templates are only being used to create the policy. And while there are a few missing policies that have been deprecated, there are more that is right in the Windows 11 one, even for Windows 10, than the current Windows 10 one is. And if you have some older Windows 10 versions around and you still need to manage them separately, what I recommend is to just spin up a separate VM where you configure the group policy management console to work against their local repository instead of the central repository to deal with those exceptions. Because we only need the templates when we manage the policy when you change it. And the existing policy will work just fine. Templates are only there for management. So I don't necessarily agree with this recommendation here. I found more success by simply using this one anywhere I can, even for Windows 10 devices. And then if I need to have some old, because we're talking about 5, 6, 7 policies out of thousands that are no longer available. And the likelihood that you're using one of them is actually not very high either, because they were indeed not used very much. So that would be my take on it. Go with this one if you have the chance. Put that one in the central store. And if you still need some rare exceptions, have a separate management station where you use an older template for those older devices. Also, you can make your life a little bit easier also by not having too many versions of Windows. Just because there are like 4 or 5 supported versions of Windows 10 at all given time, it doesn't mean you should have all of those 5 versions available in your organization. I get that you can't have one because there is always, upgrading from one to the next. But if you can keep 2, it makes managing of policies much easier. Also now with the release cadence changed, Windows 10 22H2 is just around the corner. Windows 11 22H2 is just around the corner. And Windows 10 has keeping their 30-month support, but they are on a yearly cycle now instead of twice per year. And Windows 11 has, always been a year, the first year. And there you had 36 months to go to the next one. So Microsoft has listened. Organizations were a little bit taken aback by, what do you mean, upgrading twice per year? No, it's too frequently. So that is good. So in general, it's getting better. It's not just customers that are having to learn about the Windows as a service journey. It's been Microsoft as well, trying to figure out a good balance. Because if you compare with older, like you did an upgrade every 5, 6, 7 years, that's one end of the spectrum, and twice per year is here.
Yeah, I like the 36-month support model. I was always kind of, and this is not reflective of my employer, it's just personal opinion, but your life cycle of a machine is roughly 36 months unless you're in education. So if you could just bin the laptop, or you just do a lease every 3 years, you can get out of the upgrading business entirely.
I like it, and I mean it's also the vendors. I was visiting Dell down in Austin a while back, and they had it was a really large like warehouse type lab room where they had a wall with every model known to man that they had built, where they had to test drivers and setups for all these different versions of Windows. And imagine having to test not just one version, but 5 at all given times. That's a lot of work.
That is a lot of work.
So they had a hard time catching up as well.
Sure.
Some of them eventually gave up and says, I just use the latest package and good. I believe HP is still the only one that like targets them with the right edition. Like, okay, we tested this package on this version. Let's go. All right. Good stuff. Imran is basically saying has used WIM Witch and it was the cloud. Great tools, love them. Yep, cannot agree more on that one. Let's see. That's a question for you. Is Cloud 365 or Windows 365 PC a replacement to VDI?
Short answer, no, but it can. Windows 365 can absolutely coexist with an existing VDI environment. It really just depends on what you're trying to get out of it. For folks that have an existing VDI environment, they've already have VDI admins that know how the system works and know the dark arts of VDI management, then you don't have to replace it. Windows 365 is solely a persistent desktop deployment, so it's one-to-one. We don't have multi-session, we don't have app streaming. So if you need those as a for your production environment, then you'd use AVD. You could use them in tandem. Now, where Windows 365 really shines is in its ease of use. It's the easiest way to deploy Windows. just flat out. It's just so simple. And so if you need to have a VDI like experience, but you don't have administrative staff that know how to do that, you don't have the hardware, you don't have the Azure subscription, you don't have all of those parts in place. Windows 365 is darn near turnkey. And if you're using Microsoft hosted network and pure Azure AD, it absolutely is turnkey. And so while it can, and we've talked to many customers that are looking to get out of the VDI business. They don't want to have the racks. They don't want to pay the additional licensing, the administrative overhead, all of those things, the DR scenarios that you have to design for. So it could. One of the things that I like to really tout as a shining example of how they can coexist is mergers and acquisitions. If you're going to try to incorporate 500 new employees over the course of a weekend and you're on an on-prem VDI environment, you need to make sure your hosts are sound. You need to make sure that you've got the capacity. If you don't, well, then you need to go to the cloud and procure it and tie it in. Whereas Windows 365 is, okay, create the accounts, give them a license, boom, the machines are made for them, and then let them log in. And so officially not, but it can, but they do work very well together. Hopefully that makes sense.
Awesome, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
John is asking on LinkedIn, is offline ISO imaging from thumb drive an industry standard process? Besides having to create new ISOs, is anything something is changed every time? Anytime something is changed or updated, what are the downsides of offline imaging? That's basically the question. Donna, Andrew?
Yeah, is it an industry standard practice? Yeah. In smaller shops, we called it sneaker net, because if you have USB keys, you got to go physically plug it in. So can you do that? Sure. Does it work? Absolutely. As you pointed out, that if anything changes, you do need to update it, and then you have to rebuild the keys, and then you have to version your keys. So while it works, it's far from ideal. If you're dealing with more than a handful of systems, or you're dealing with remote offices, it doesn't scale. Is where it really boils down to. I would go with configuration manager as industry standard, but if you don't have that MDT, it doesn't take much to stand up MDT. It really doesn't. And the licensing cost, I mean, you can't beat that. So if you could get away from doing USB key, and that's not going to bring in a lot of complexity for your environment, I would highly encourage getting off of that. But you can absolutely still use it. But as John pointed out, and the question, the main downside is right there, is you have to rebuild those things physically each time.
And to the point, it is still used out there. I work with customers every other week that are still using that in some capacity, where their main deployment solution is network driven. They have locations where either their application set or image size is so big and that WAN link is so tiny in comparison. So it will take them like 2 days, 3 days to get an image down, no matter what. If it's just a few devices, you don't have anything peer to that location already. But to some extent, what can be achieved instead, it's something that is very near and dear to my heart, and that is basically leverage peer-to-peer solutions. So if you have offices still, for those of you that does, and you make sure that at least some PCs in the office have content in their cache, when you do new deployments, the client doesn't have to reach over the WAN link other than to join the domain and get some policies. All the packages will come from local friends, and that's actually pretty quick. You can do a deployment in like 20 minutes. You're like, wow, that was fast. But in terms of offline media, if you need one, ConfigMgr, you create a sequence media, you pick the standalone media option, you pick the sequence you want to work with, and it allows you to create a USB stick directly, assuming you have installed the console on your laptop or your workstation, or it can create an ISO file that you can then download and put on a USB stick. The content of it, not the ISO itself. If you're not if you don't like this part, if you don't like PowerShell, you can download tools like Rufus. It's a nice little GUI that allows you to select the ISO, select the USB stick, and you're done. And as Donna mentioned, MDT has the same. If you don't have ConfigMgr, you still want to build a USB stick. MDT doesn't offer a fancy GUI for it, but it does create the content. So you can go ahead and create medias for that. So here is one I was actually doing for deploying machines directly into Intune. And this is the regular production media with drivers and apps and whatnot. And when you generate that media, you do get a folder structure, basically. This one here, this is what you put on the USB stick, and you make it active, and you're good. If you want to do UEFI, you need to make sure it's FAT32. Limits a little bit the number of size of your image that you can have on it, but you can split your images in multiple chunks if that's the case. So if you have an 8 gig image, well, you have to split it in 2 parts, and MDT will do that for you. So it's definitely doable, and it's a quick deployment. The MDT one takes like 4 or 5 minutes. It's pretty cool. Just done. Okay, because USB sticks these days, they're pretty quick.
Yeah, as long as you're using 3-point, make sure it's got the little blue plastic in there. You don't want to be trying to pull that off with the USB 2.
I just got one of these I've been using for backups, moving a lot of VMs. So this is a 2 terabyte SSD external Samsung, 300 megabyte per second read and write. It's like, bam.
Can't beat that.
That's quick.
That's pretty nice.
So that would be the equivalent of what? Like a 4 gigabit network, something like that. All right, so let's see what else is coming in here. Yeah, Shadow asked the questions about the templates earlier. He just commented out and said, yeah, it's indeed the central store that they are the most worried about. And my recommendation again is upgrade that onto Windows 11 and deal with any exceptions if you have them with a separate workstation for those templates. Sean Mark is asking here on YouTube, what are the steps to link the Apple Store to Intune in order to manage Mac applications with Intune? I haven't the foggiest.
So I can probably add a little bit there. I think so. There's a couple of different pieces of this. It is true that you need a DUNS number. You have to be a business, I believe, to either have an Apple School Manager account or an Apple Business account, which would allow you to generate a volume purchase program or VPP token that you can then integrate with Intune. But it's my understanding that that will only allow for you to deploy iOS apps and not Mac OS apps through the Apple App Store. I think on Mac OS you can only do line of business apps and DMG files. So you have to build those apps manually when it comes to Mac. So there are a couple of prereqs: the DUNS number, Apple School Manager, Apple Business Manager. I think they've may have changed the name on those a couple of different times. Generate VPP token that'll allow you to deploy your paid iOS apps. Otherwise, for Mac, you'll have to create those apps.
I remember reading something around recent updates adding some additional support in general for applications that it could be the scripting support they added in recently. One of the 22.07 or 22.8 service releases of Intune.
That sounds right.
Yeah, the DMD type applications that you manage, Andrew, they are still in preview. I can bring up that link here. So let's go ahead and share that. There we go. So this was back in April. They added in a preview of that. before uninstall.
Yeah, I think the ability to install DMGs has been there for a while. So you can, oh no, it does say the entire, even adding one is in public preview. Interesting. Yeah, and then you can do PKG files as well.
Unfortunately, Mac OS is not my forte. It's been, yeah. If anyone happen to know here that is attending the live stream, by all means, put in a comment in the chat, and we'll be happy to relay that to the others. Let's see what else. That was just commenting back on John's question regarding the offline media, and it is, as we mentioned here, a standard process, but there are other solutions available like Autopilot and whatnot, Intune, ConfigMgr, MDT to help doing deployments in different ways. Let's see. Hi from Puerto Rico. Hi there, Alex. Let's see. Alan is asking, this is one for you, Donna. Have you set up, let's see. Have you set up Vnet for Windows 365 for hybrid AD? I'm having issues with resolving DNS. Any thoughts?
Sure. So yes, I have. I have both done it personally in my lab, and I've worked with customers trying to set that up. So the first place to probably start is, did you set the custom DNS entry in your Vnet? There is a setting when you go into the Vnet, you can go to DNS servers, you can click that, and by default, when you create a Vnet, it defaults to Azure, which makes sense. But unfortunately, Azure doesn't know about your domain. So then what you need to do is you need to put in the IPs of your on-prem DNS or your AD integrated DNS, so that way it can find AD. If you've already done that and it's still not working, then the next place to probably start sniffing around is going to be in firewalls, security, applications or gateways that may be in place. If you're doing any type of complicated DNS where you're bouncing it and then bouncing it between different NAT gateways. So, starting at the basic, and I've had numerous customers that have, are banging their heads on it, and it's, no, there's the DNS setting. So if that's what it is, it's an easy fix. Don't feel bad. It has, a lot of people have gotten caught up on that. If that is all set and you believe you've got it set up correctly and you're still not getting it, open up a ticket. I know folks like to cringe when anybody suggests opening up a ticket, but for the Windows 365 support folks, there are some really, really talented engineers on our support team that are working with Windows 365. I work with these folks hand in hand because sometimes, there's a bug or there's something broken. And so start there. Open up a ticket if you have to. And you can just, if you have questions down the road, you can ping me on Twitter. I'm on Discord. Where else am I lurking? On Reddit. The handle is all the same across all three, so you can tag me if you got any further Windows 365 questions. But good luck. I would like to encourage, if you can get away from doing a hybrid, absolutely do so. If you're going to be doing, and this is just really just good general practice. If you're going to start doing a proof of concept for Windows 365 Enterprise, where you really want to start with is Azure AD and Microsoft hosted network, because that is the easiest to configure. That's going to get your cloud PCs stood up almost immediately. Once you start going down the road of bringing your own Vnet, now you own that. You're welcome, Alan. I saw the little comment in there. But when we start adding on even more complex layers, like with hybrid, because now you need the line of sight to the DC, you need the SCP working. It just gets more and more complicated. So your best practice, and I hate to use that term, but really best practice is Azure AD plus Microsoft hosted, because it's damn simple. It's just brilliant. But it's a good place to start. Now, if you have to do hybrid, absolutely, I get it. We've got customers that are on hybrid, and you're not going to be able to pry their GPOs away from security's cold dead hands. So you do what you can do.
Yeah, that's always that politics that comes in play that is interesting. I put out your Twitter handle out there, so you guys out there, if you're not following Donna, you should. You said you had that handle across the board.
Yep. On Discord and Reddit, just tag me. I'm not super active in WinAdmins, but I get emails when I get tagged. Same on Reddit. And if you're in the SECM threads, hey, that works too. With WIM Witch questions, whatever.
Beautiful. All right. Thank you so much.
Mhm.
Good stuff. Okay. Let's see what else. John is following up on the LinkedIn question or question he posted on LinkedIn earlier. Oh, now I want to hear more about peer-to-peer imaging. I didn't know about that. I'll be happy to.
I knew you were going to get excited when we saw those.
Yeah. So, shorthand story, this has been a lifelong passion to me to figure out ways of deploying Windows as quickly as possible. I've written a gazillion of different benchmark posts, and I really enjoy it. It's just been fun. And for me lately, it's been about helping organizations reducing infrastructure. Like I was working with a hotel chain a while back. They had 4,000 clients, but they had 200 distribution points. So like for every 20 client, there was a server. And it was like they had members of their team every single week trying to figure out why these 4 packages didn't go out to these, 4 distribution points. And another day it was 7 other packages, just a super much overhead. And when I left them, they had 2 distribution points. They only needed 1, but we added 1 extra for just redundancy to have, and they just switched to peer-to-peer instead. Because the idea is super simple. Instead of having every client downloading content from a central server, allow one of them to do it. And as soon as anybody else is requesting content, it goes on that local switch rather than over the WAN link. And Microsoft these days supports 3 different peer-to-peer platforms. This one is not used for imaging. This one is only for Intune, for Office updates, for everything that is native to Windows, because Windows has a bunch of components it's updating on its own in the background. But ConfigMgr supports these 2. My favorite is this one here, Peer Cache. I'm trying to avoid. Not the biggest fan of that implementation. Branch cache, in my experience, is much better. And good news is that it's native to Windows as well. It's already there. You not need to configure it, enable it, and use it. If you want to have branch cache supports for imaging, there is a little company out there that I happen to work for, 2-Pound Software. They have a product called OSD Toolkit. There is a free option available for the community. What this tool does, it's enable branch cache and bits in Windows PE, so that you can leverage the same peer-to-peer capabilities as you have in full Windows, also in WinPE. So once you have that, you typically only need, to add that support to your sequences. If I go here and pick one of our deployment sequences, it's just a standard ConfigMgr sequence. This is one that I believe is based on the native template. I just added some stuff to it over the years, but this is where I've added in some step to get the toolkit going and to enable branch cache and bits during deployment. Because as soon as you do that, every time the sequence is downloading a package, could be a driver, it could be an operating system image, it could be applications down the road. If there is a local friend around that already have them in their cache, Sequence will download it from them rather than the distribution point. So the network teams, when you start to enable this, they usually get very confused because they are used to see thousands of clients basically hammering the WAN links, getting content centrally. Instead, now the local switches on each and every branch office are starting to light up as Christmas trees, and you have a lot of traffic there. But that's typically where you want to have the traffic. If you do this right, you can typically reduce up to 90% of the traffic over the WAN link. And you can reduce the number of distribution points a lot. One organization I've been chatting with, I haven't worked personally with them, but they have about 600,000 clients, but they have 2,200 DPs. That's a lot. Another organization that have a bit over 400,000 clients that have 11 DPs. I would pick the second one if I had to. It's less to manage.
Mm-hmm.
Because just managing 2,000 some servers just for content, that's a lot of work. So I prefer the simplicity of allowing the clients to do what they are good at. They are already out there. They are well connected to each other. Let them do the work. That's why you have the bandwidth. That's why you have your gigabit switches. One customer I talked to, they have a different approach also. They didn't like that. Their security team didn't like that clients were sharing content to other clients. So instead, they scrapped the links here and replaced them with 10 gigabit links. Oops, not 19, 10. That's also a solution. Basically, make everything a really large LAN. That also takes care of the problem. Cost effective, not so much, but good news, it was a government type organization. So at least my tax money came to, or our tax money came to some good use there. But yeah, I would recommend peer-to-peer for that case. So long story short, it's been around for a decade, very solid, somewhat challenging to implement, but once it's there, it's there. Allows for quick deployments. All right. Thank you for that question. That was an awesome question. Let's see. We have a question coming in on LinkedIn here. Intune deployment of specific MSI. Recommendation to create the Intune format or to use original MSI package. So to give it some context here, and this is something we cover in depth in our various Intune courses, but let me bring up something to help answer that question. Intune supports, and this is of course for Windows 10 and 11 these days, but they support a large chunk of application types that you can use. I recommend sticking with this one because the old line of business MSI one, single file MSI package, very limited in what you can do. It's simply not very good. That was the first attempt to add in support for application deployment like a decade ago in Intune. Win32 apps with the additional agent that is used to manage this is so much better. So I recommend any type of application that you need is basically used in that format. We even have customers that are, instead of using the native Office for, I still call this Office even though they changed the name. I even use that as a Win32 app because it gives some great flexibility. And to make a point about my caching on peer-to-peer, if you do Win32 apps in Intune, like I have a few apps here, like a tiny Adobe Suite app of 20 gigs, that's a separate story. But all of these apps that you can create, if you configure them when you assign them to the various groups in Intune, doesn't show, but it says foreground. You can force Intune to deploy them very, very quickly. And on top of that, leverage peer-to-peer solutions. Because when Windows is downloading these apps from Intune, the Win32 apps, it is using delivery optimization, meaning content can be peered. And if you set up that correctly, you cannot go up to 90% typically, but you can go in between 60 and 80% reduction of the WAN link traffic or the internet link that is used to being downloaded these guys. So if you are using Win32 apps, we did publish some recommendations out here at some point. I know that because I wrote them here. So this is just things that we've learned that if you don't mind spending like 5 minutes and creating some better default settings for DO, you will find that those applications will be deployed much faster and you'll have much better peer-to-peer efficiency for those applications. If you really want to get fancy, you can start to spin up ConfigMgr servers, not to be used as ConfigMgr servers, but as to be used as cache servers. Because you can have a VM running ConfigMgr and a distribution point role, and the only thing that one does, if you enable it, is to become a cache server. So
Doink.
instead,
That's what that used to be called. I like that acronym better.
yeah, I totally agree. Doink was a great word. Apparently, Microsoft Marketing thought differently of it, so they changed it. So it's now called Microsoft Connected Cache. But the idea behind that one is obviously that instead of having every single client reaching out to internet to grab content, why not have a cache server that is more well connected to them, that will do the download on behalf of them. So you won't save too much over here, but you will save a lot over here. So that's also doable. So long story short, yes, use Win32 apps. Stay away from the old original line of business MSI thing that was in Intune. Yeah. So there's a question coming in on Joe's apartment. That was an interesting alias. All right, I'm assuming his name is Joe. How do I configure the optimization to prioritize download from local peers? That's actually just the policy setting. In general, if you configure a cache server, the client's going to use that most of the time because you're actually telling them to do it. But the trick when setting up DO is to make sure that clients that are well connected to each other are grouped logically together. So for example, we had one customer that tried a different approach. They put a scope around their entire network so that every client in every site were allowed to peer-to-peer to each other, and that effectively killed their network quite quickly. The idea is to group them together so that well-connected clients that are well connected to each other, they will share content to each other. So these machines will share, these machines will share. And you can do that either with group IDs, you can leverage ConfigMgr to do that, you can do scripts to do that, you can do policies to do that, Or if you are a little bit uncertain about how the network is laid out with the customer you're working with or in your own environment, there is a safeguard you can enable and say, hey, if the clients are on the same subnet, limit them to each other. And that has been available since 1803 of Windows, but it's basically just one of those policies that you can configure. It's called restrict peer selection, and there is a subnet option in there. It may not be like the most effective for any network, but it's a good fail-safe because usually, yeah, go ahead.
I was going to say, unless your network is like, 10.0.0.0/8 or something like that, which I've seen a couple of those.
Yes.
So make sure your subnets are rationally laid out.
Yeah, you are absolutely to the point there. For most organizations, if a machine is on the same subnet as someone, basically same network ID, they are usually well connected to each other. So that's a good starting point when you try to figure things out. In newer versions of Windows 10 and Windows 11, 21H2, upcoming 22H2, there is another option you can enable. It's called local peer discovery. It reduces the number of connections to Microsoft quite a bit, because the default behavior for DO is for every single download that the client has, it's going to request that download from one of many CDN or servers on internet. And they're going to say, hey, you know what? You have a local friend that has it, so go grab it from that one. But the sheer number of connections here is quite astonishing. With DNS-SD, you are kind of reducing the need for that many connections. So you'll find it's faster, especially for smaller file types. So that was a nice addition that they did. We start to have that as a default. We have an agent that we use to configure DO settings. We start to have that as a default on supported versions of Windows. So just to reduce the number of connections. I pulled out some statistics on one of the machines I was working with the other day. I'm not sure if I have it still up and running. Yeah, it's hard to see here, but this is the number of connections this PC has done since it was deployed. Wow. That's a few.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'll say.
Most normal Windows 10 clients, Windows 11 clients, when they're just being Windows, they maybe do 10, 20,000 a month, but it's per PC. So what we see these days is that's the sheer amount of traffic. So this is from one of our customers. This is the ConfigMgr traffic. This is Windows being Windows.
Wow.
Chatty, isn't it?
A little bit. In all fairness, there were some Intune apps in this column as well, but not much. But still, it's 2 terabytes of content per day. So anything you can do with peer-to-peer and remove connections is actually for the good.
Mm-hmm.
And don't skip those updates, because these are only security updates. Microsoft doesn't update just for the fun of it. It's often a reason, either it's a bug fix or it's a security patch. And you can't really go into your security folks and say, hey, I have a great idea here. Let's patch half of Windows. And let's hope that the patch that half that we don't patch doesn't get attacked. What do you think about that? I don't think they will be so happy with it. So put in the monthly updates, but also allow Windows to update its own components when it wants to. And those are released every other day, multiple times per week. There is no patch Tuesday for those. Yeah. Let's see. Where did my chat window go? Here. Also a question regarding the YouTube stream. Manuel found it eventually.
I think it's MA is the next one.
what are the logs we have to use to monitor the app or TS from the server side, not the client? Andrew, Donna, any idea on server-side logging, monitoring?
So what I used when I was doing OSD, because I used to have to try to get the SMS TS log off of there, and that was a pain, especially working remote. I ended up going into status message queries. And status message queries logs every status message coming into ConfigMan, including your task sequence. So that's what I would use. And what's nice about it is it's just as verbose as the log, but it's in order. So you're not sitting there scrolling up and down or trying to find and going through seas of ketchup and mustard trying to find your error. You can see which step your error happened, and you'll get the text, the terminal or the console output right into the message. That made my life as an OSD consultant and admin just night and day easier. I've stopped chasing down logs at that point, unless I needed something specific, like retrieving a log from like driver automation tool. Well, that wasn't necessarily logged in status message queries.
Yes. So here is kind of what Donna is referring to. Just asking for, in this case, for a specific deployment. You can see all those in real time, more or less. There is some other tools out there I've been using. There is a sequence monitor for Trevor Jones that's been quite popular, where you pick a sequence that you want to work with, and it will show you those actions in real time showing up. But it is tapping into status messages to get that information. Even the native ConfigMgr reports, they're not great, but they're not terrible either. So you have a few of those, which allow you to do status reports and deployment and progress. And they also tap into status messages to some extent. If you don't mind a bit of SQL, you can tap into information there that is happening by sequences. I've been using that to track deployment times, where I'm asking for a lot of information about a given deployment, and then basically, okay, is it better that it takes 19 minutes than 241 minutes? Yeah, probably.
Depends if you're billing by the hour.
True, true. There is a central site logging you can enable. If you have the MDT integration, it's built in. If you do that, every time you deploy a machine, it basically uploads the log files to folder, and not just the sequence log file, if you have that, like this one here, but also other log files that helps troubleshooting. So if you're troubleshooting join domain issues, you will have a log file there. There is a lot of community versions of this as well. I believe Jürgen is still the most popular one. It's like 5, 6, 7 years old. But he released that was maybe not the most brightest search term. Here we go. Back in 2017, PowerShell script that copies the log files up to the server. Easy. Yeah. So that would be a good start, I'll say. Queries, reporting, tools, copy the log files up to the server, because they are rough to try to have someone on the phone. Can you press F8 and get the log files? Especially if that person is not technical, it's going to be hard.
Yep.
But we are, dang, time flies when you're having fun.
It does, doesn't it?
I don't see any more questions, and our hour is up. Donna, Andrew, thank you so much for joining.
My pleasure.
To the rest of the world, enjoy the week, and we'll see you guys back next Wednesday.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, everyone.